Hello and welcome to the presentation for the Expert Practice Assessment Support session. This presentation really should be viewed after you've looked at the other YouTube clip where I went through the Webfolio and the assessment criteria in a little bit more detail. I will be revisiting these again, but very briefly. This presentation really is just to sort of reassure you and make sure that you're on track for the final submission date. What I would like to do is take the opportunity to sort of say I appreciate it's been a long journey. You've been doing this module now for 2 semesters. However, you are nearly there, and I think the reassuring thing is that throughout the whole of the module we've been giving you activities to do, and those activities have been formative activities and they've been focused around the learning outcomes that you have to achieve. So all in all you've undertaken 6 activities, and for each of those activities they have been aimed at you meeting one of the learning outcomes. So if you've undertaken all of the activities, taken on board the feedback that has been given to you by your group tutors, and then thought about how you might want to amend your work bearing in mind the feedback that was given to you, you should be fine really. And although it feels like it's been a long journey, we are actually nearly there now. So for the rest of the presentation, what I want to do is very briefly go through each of those learning outcomes again. I don't particularly want to dwell on them because that was really the purpose of the other YouTube clip that you'll have looked at. But I do want to just reiterate it in terms of the marking criteria, because that's what we'll be looking at, and that's also what the external examiner will be looking at when they're looking at your Webfolio. So just to reiterate with the assessment, the first thing to note is that your Webfolios, and as you're making amendments to them, they're already submitted into the final assessment workspace, so you don't have to submit your Webfolio again. If you remember right back at the start of the module, you copied your Webfolio over from that space, which means that everything that you've been doing and adding to your Webfolio I can actually see at the minute. So you don't have to, when it comes to the 4th of May, have to send the Webfolio anywhere by midnight on the 4th of May. What will happen is by midnight on the 4th of May that workspace will close. So you can carry on working between now and the 4th of May at midnight, keep adding things or editing your Webfolio, and that will remain active in that workspace. Once it gets beyond midnight, any changes that you make to your Webfolio in your asset store won't be reflected in that workspace. The other thing to really reiterate that's important is that there are 2 components to this assessment. So the first is the Webfolio itself, which is your profile of evidence. That's marked out of 70 and you must pass that with 40%. Then obviously you've got your assignment, which is marked out of 30, and you must pass that with 40%. Now in the past we've had people who get referred in one or the other, and you are given an opportunity to resubmit. If you have to resubmit, then you have to just resubmit that one piece of work. Not that I'm anticipating anybody will need to resubmit, but it's not the end of the world. So there will be occasions where if you feel that you're struggling to get your case studies done in time, you're not going to get the competency transcript signed off. If there are any issues like that, it's really important that you contact me as the module leader as soon as possible. There are options that we can take going forward, but we can discuss them on a case-by-case basis. Now, as far as the marking goes, what's going to happen is, as you know, we split you up into 4 different groups. So I will be marking my group because I've negotiated all the individual learning outcomes with them. Jo will be marking her group. She negotiated all the individual learning outcomes with her participants in her group. What we will then do is we will cross over and we will moderate each other's marking. So what we're looking for there is that we're marking consistently between the 2 of us. Then what will happen after that is we will allow the external examiner access to all the work webfolios on the workspace, and they will be directed to certain webfolios to look at, but they can look at any of the webfolios that are on there. Okay, so moving on now to just go back through each of the learning outcomes again. Like I explained right at the start, I don't want to dwell on these because I have gone through them in a lot more detail on the other webfolio, but it's just really to reiterate this for you. So the first learning outcome is producing a profile of evidence that shows your clinical competency. So in this tab here, this learning outcome tab in your webfolio, that's where you put your 15 case studies, your signed clinical competency transcript piece that's signed off to say that you can work autonomously. That's where that actually goes. And then again, some narration in there, which I talked about in a little bit more detail in the other presentation, but just pulling it together. Learning outcome 2 is about critically reflecting on non-standard or difficult circumstances. What's really important as well for you to appreciate, I guess, is that some of these learning outcomes have actually come from the college's criteria for an expert and advanced practitioner. So should you want to go forward in the future and submit your profile of evidence, these will be some of the things that they will be looking at. So it's really good practice to get into that way of thinking now. So again, I don't want to dwell on this too much because we talked about it in the other presentation, but in your learning outcome 2 tab here, that's where you would pick out 1 or 2 particular case studies. Don't repeat the information, just a narration about that, thinking about what you've learned, how it's maybe changed your practice and how you've moved forward from there. Learning outcome 3, critically appraising legal, ethical and professional issues. So again, you can cross-reference to case studies. In particular, you put in the etivity that we did specifically around that. The word count was deliberately tight on that because it was more about making sure you were thinking along the right lines. Take on board the feedback and expand on that. If you did the pre and post test, you might want to put that on there in a little bit of reflection when you maybe see how your knowledge has changed or been affected. So again, in your webfolio, that just goes without saying into the Learning Outcome 3 tab there. Learning Outcome 4, again, is thinking about individual patient differences that might impact upon either your technical or your clinical decision making. And again, don't want to go into a lot of detail because I went through that on the other presentation, but again, that goes in here. So again, don't repeat what you've got in your case studies, maybe pull out a couple and have that narrative discussion around that, those particular case studies. So we've got learning outcome 1, 2, 3 and 4, which are going to be covered by your case studies. So the important thing to note here is that in each of your case studies, you will have hopefully done in-depth case studies where you've critically evaluated the literature and discussed those issues in context of that particular patient. At the end of that particular case study, you might have written a short reflective piece. So all you need to do really is go back through those really well written, well referenced case studies that you've been doing in the department throughout the whole of this academic year and pull out key points that you can put into each of those learning tabs. So as long as you've been doing your case studies really well, you've been backing it up with references, you've been critically appraising what you've been doing, you should be able to pick out the key points from there. Okay, so moving on, if we look at the individually negotiated learning outcome that is not your assignment, what I would say about evidence for this is make sure that you answer whatever that learning outcome is. And this goes for the assignment as well, so I'll touch on that in a minute as well. But whatever you negotiated for the learning outcome that was not going to be for your assignment, if you've posed it as a question, if it's a critical appraisal of the literature with reference to practice in your own department, thinking about recommendations for practice, make sure that you answer that question as you present that information in that particular part of the webfolio. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They tend to find all this information and just want to put it in there, but it's really important that if you've set a specific learning outcome that says that you're going to look at this, critique that and think about it in reference to your own practice, that you actually do that. So you do what you say on the tin, that kind of thing. So if we come on to the assignment, the same applies for this really. So again, if you set it as a question, if you're posing it as a discussion paper, if you're talking about a critical appraisal of a particular thing in context of what you're going to do in your department, make sure that you answer that question that you've actually posed right at the start. Okay, so you can see the marking grid on here. This is the one that is marked separately from the webfolio, and it must be passed, so you need to get at least 40% in this as a separate piece of work. I think one of the queries that came up on the discussion board was about writing, whether it be in the first person or the third person. So I'd like to just take a minute or two just to clarify this here. In terms of the assignment itself, it needs to be written as an academic piece of work, so it needs to be written in the third person. What we're really looking for here is the M-level critical appraisal skills and the more traditional academic writing style for this. Now, as far as your webfolio goes, there will, by nature of a webfolio and by nature of reflection, be elements of first person writing in there. So it is perfectly fine in the reflective parts of your case studies to put, okay, this is what I learnt from this. And that's fine, that's okay to do that. Obviously, for example, in the case studies maybe where you're talking about what you've seen with that patient and you're talking about the literature, that might be discussed more in the third person. But in the little part at the end of the case study where you talk about your personal reflection, what you've learnt, what you might think about and do differently next time, that's fine to write about it in the first person. I'm just going to skip back up a few pages, bear with me, just so I can really show you on here. So the things like the introduction and where you started is going to be written in the first person. You know, you might want to put, hi, my name is Angie Eddy, I'm a therapy radiographer. I had 10 years of clinical experience at Leeds and then I moved to Lincoln where I was a superintendent, blah blah. So you would talk about it in that way. When you talk about perhaps in learning outcome 2 where we're asking you to critically reflect upon standard or difficult circumstances, the narrative text that you might put in here that would link perhaps 2 or 3 different case studies together would be, okay, so I did this patient when I was being supervised in my practice, I came across X, Y and Z. This was a particular issue for me as illustrated in case study 1. However, by the time it came to me working autonomously and I came across the same situation again and was able to manage it, the reason I was able to do that was because of X, Y and Z. So hopefully that clarifies a little bit about the tense and the first or the third person that you might be writing in. Okay, so if we go back to the assignment again now, there is an assignment brief on the Blackboard site. You might want to have a look at that. You also might want to put your draft assignment through Turnitin just to check. Sometimes it's easy to inadvertently plagiarize your work, and obviously you don't want to do that. Excuse me. So you can run that through the Turnitin submission before you actually attach it into your webfolio. So the assignment brief is, as I say, on the Blackboard site, but just to go through it really briefly here, the word limit's 3,000 words. You can put stuff in appendices, and obviously that doesn't include your reference list or any tables or figures should you include those. But there is a penalty if you go over the word count. So it's really important that you put, I think the assignment brief says you have an assignment front sheet, but on somewhere on there you just need to put your word count and your name, what the word count is, and just bear in mind when you're doing that you don't go over this 10% because you will be penalised for that. The other thing that's really important, and I know I bang on about this, but it's daft to lose pointless marks when all you need to do is reference the right way. So referencing the right way with the Harvard system, if you're not sure about it, go back onto the Blackboard site, access the library services. There's a really good crib sheet for Harvard. So Harvard system is the brackets, Eddy et al., and then the date after it.